Vermont, a small town where autumn leaves fall as gently as a breath. Caroline Wells, a teacher, a wife, a mother, thought she had it all. But then, an unexpected reunion in Boston awakened a part of her buried memories. Low voice, slight inflection, an invisible net, woven from unsaid things, unfinished emotions, and the inevitable question, is the past really sleeping, or is it just waiting to be touched again? It was autumn in Vermont, the season when the leaves turned from green to vibrant shades of red and orange, then gently fell on the trails around town like a living painting. In the small wooden house in the maple forest, Caroline Wells woke up at 6:30 every morning, as she did every day, pulling the curtains and letting the soft light into the bedroom. Jonathan was still sleeping soundly, his arm draped lightly over the empty pillow beside her. Caroline smiled slightly and quietly got out of bed, pulling her sweater over her shoulders, in the kitchen. The coffee maker began to hum, the smell of early coffee wafting out as if signaling a peaceful day. She made another cup of cocoa for her son, Oliver, who was 4 years old and always woke up with the question, "Does Mummy have to teach today?" And the answer, almost every day, yes, but I'll be back before sunset. Caroline was a literature teacher at Elkhorn High School, a small school with beige hallways and the smell of old wood. She loved teaching, but she loved standing in front of the blackboard, holding an old Emily Dickinson book, listening to her students turn the pages in silence. Every day passed like that, regular, gentle, without panic or regret. Her husband, Jonathan, was a civil engineer working for a small company in Burlington. He left early, came home late, and returned with laughter and stories from the construction site. He was not the romantic type, but he remembered birthdays, held Caroline's hand while walking, and was quiet when she needed quiet. One day early in the week, while Caroline was preparing her Wednesday lesson, she received an email from the Massachusetts Education Association, an invitation to a symposium in Boston. She read the words, "Conference on Teaching Modern Literature and the Role of Emotion in the Classroom" over and over again, as if something was weighing on her heart. It had been more than 8 years since she had been back to Boston. The city had been home when she was a college student, when she had fallen in love with Nathan Cole, when winter evenings were warmed by a cup of peppermint tea and laughter echoing through her small apartment. She sipped her cold coffee and reopened her desk drawer, where she kept her unnecessary but indispensable things. Inside was an old photo of her and Nathan on the dorm roof, the afternoon sun lacing her hair like a ribbon of honey. He was smiling, the smile that had made her think she could never live without him. Caroline folded the photo, stuffed it back into the drawer, and slammed it shut like a door to her memories. She hadn't told Jonathan about the invitation, not because she intended to hide it, but because she was still hesitant. She needed a few days to ask herself if she returned to the city. Would the old things come back 3 days later? Caroline accepted the invitation. "I'm going to Boston for 3 days," she told Jonathan one evening as they dined under the yellow lights. "There's a conference on teaching literature. I think it would help my class." Jonathan looked up from his plate of steak. "Sure, you should go. Oliver and I will survive." He winked, then smiled. No questions asked, no doubts, no checks, just a strangely simple trust. That evening, as Caroline packed her suitcase, she glanced out the window. The red maple leaves were falling slowly, like slow motion, a gentle sadness. She was no longer the college girl she had been. She was the mother of a young boy, the wife of a good man, a beloved teacher, but there was a part of her not big, not loud, that was still not quite asleep. The train from Vermont to Boston left at 7:15 a.m. Caroline sat by the window, carrying a book, not reading, and a brown sheepskin scarf. As the train left the mountains, passing through the changing woods, she felt a slight flutter in her heart. Not fear, not excitement, but a nameless feeling, like someone touching a forgotten memory. Boston greeted her with a cold sea breeze, the salty smell of the ocean mixed with car exhaust, and the sounds of a city that never slept. She arrived at the hotel, checked in, and then walked through the old streets, the corners of the cafes where she had sat reading and waiting for Nathan, the stone steps where they had argued about the future, and the tree-lined avenue where he had first kissed her. She entered the auditorium on time. For a moment, sitting in her chair, among hundreds of teachers from all over, she felt relieved, as if her memory would not find her in the sea of strangers, until the moderator stepped up to the podium and said, "And now, Nathan Cole, a journalist who has just returned from a long assignment in Uganda, will speak about emotions and memories in education." Caroline did not hear the rest. Her heart pounded. That name, that voice, that memory, all rose up at once like a song hidden deep in the heart, and someone played it back. She looked up, and there he was, on stage, the same gaze, deep, deep, and full of nostalgia. The hall erupted in applause as Nathan stepped onto the podium. But for Caroline, all the noise was silenced. She sat motionless, clutching the hem of her dress, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. It had been 11 years, and he, the man she had thought would be hers forever, was standing before her, not on a screen, not on the news, but real, present, in the flesh. Nathan wore an unbuttoned dark blue shirt, a lightly worn grey crew-neck sweater. His short, dark hair was now streaked with silver. He was no longer as young as he remembered, but his eyes, the way he stood and smiled softly at everyone, were still the man she had loved with all her faith in her 20s. "Thank you," Nathan began. His voice was deep, clear, with the timbre of someone who had experienced it all. "I'm not here to talk about war or poverty. I'm here to talk about memory, about what all of us educators are passing on every day, the ability to hold on to emotion." Caroline tried to listen, but every word he spoke was like a tap on a layer of memory she thought she had buried deep. He told of a child in a Ugandan refugee camp who held a torn book tightly because it was the first gift she had ever received. He told of a little girl in Colombia who texted him, "I can't remember my old teacher's name, but I remember him holding me when I cried." She felt Nathan's eyes, among the hundreds of people, occasionally drifting toward her. She wasn't sure if he had noticed her yet, but a part of her heart knew he had. The sharing session ended. She tried to slip out of the hall, but before she could stand up, a soft voice sounded behind her, "Caroline." She turned. Nathan was standing there, less than a meter away, so close she could see the lines under his eyes, the way his lips pursed in hesitation. For a moment she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Hello," she whispered. He smiled. "I wasn't sure if I was seeing things, but then I thought, you're unmistakable." She nodded. "I thought I'd never see you again." "Me neither." There was a long pause. "Maybe," he began. We could go somewhere, if you're not in a hurry. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to play it safe. But another part, the part pulled by some invisible net, whispered just once. "Okay," she said. They sat across from each other in a small cafe in the Back Bay, a place they'd been frequenting since college. The space was largely unchanged brown leather chairs, soft yellow lighting, and the smell of cinnamon rolls and roasted coffee. "Do you live here?" she asked. "Not really. I still travel a lot, but Boston is where I always come back. I remember you saying, there's no place like home. Is that still the case?" Nathan shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "Not anymore. I believe now home is where someone has seen you weak and stayed." She clasped her hands around her mug of hot tea. "You've changed a lot." "You haven't," he said, looking at her. "Still the same eyes. Still the way you look at someone as if you're reading a page they haven't written." Caroline felt something skip a beat. She looked out the window. Boston was still grey, still cold, still full of cars. But inside her, everything seemed to be moving. "I'm married," she said bluntly. "We have a son. His name is Oliver." Nathan nodded. "I guess so. You have a mother's look. What about you? Not married? Maybe. Haven't found anyone who makes you want to leave all that traveling behind?" There was a long silence, not awkward, but as if they were walking around something neither of them wanted to touch. "You know," Caroline said, "when we broke up, I thought I'd never love anyone else." "I know," Nathan whispered, "because when you left, I thought the same thing." She smiled faintly. "But then we both move on, and love in other ways." "Yes," he said, "but there are memories. Caroline, they don't ask you to keep them, they keep them." She didn't answer. They left the bar as the city lights came on. The air was colder. He offered to take her back to the hotel, but she refused. "I need to walk alone for a bit," she said. "I need time to breathe." Nathan didn't press. He just said, "If there's one thing I regret, it's not saying goodbye properly to you that year." Caroline nodded slightly. Today was a good enough goodbye, and she turned and walked away, not looking back, not crying, but each step felt like stepping on a long-standing net. That night, in the hotel room, Caroline sat at her desk. She took out a piece of paper and wrote, "Nathan, thank you for giving me an afternoon long enough to close an old chapter. I didn't think I had much left to do, but it turns out sometimes you need to look back to see how far you've come. I don't know what your memories of me are, but I know, no matter what, we were the best thing that could have happened to my youth, and that's good enough to keep. Caroline." She folded the letter, no name, no address. Then she put it in the drawer, along with the old photo she'd folded 3 days before, outside. The sound of Boston's car horns echoed in the distance. In the room, there was only her and an ego that had just touched the past and decided to let it sleep. Caroline returned to Vermont on a lightly rainy afternoon. The maples by the train station had turned reddish-brown, most of their leaves gone. She dragged her suitcase across the empty street, the wheels crunching on the pavement. The drizzle wasn't enough to wet her hair, just enough to make the air smell of earth, the place she called home. Jonathan and Oliver were playing with blocks in the living room when she opened the door and walked in. He ran to hug his mother, gurgling about the bridge that collapsed, but his dad fixed it with green Legos. Jonathan just looked at her, saying nothing, but there was everything in that look waiting, quiet, unspoken presence, Caroline kissed her son's hair and said, "I miss you too." "We do," Jonathan said. The evening passed like any other. A meal of roast chicken and pumpkin, Oliver's math homework, soft music from the kitchen radio. Caroline talked, laughed, but there was a layer of inaccessibility inside her, as if some part of her mind were drifting somewhere else. While Jonathan washed the dishes, she stood on the porch, watching the rain fall through the wooden roof. Each drop seemed to pierce the air, carrying with it an indescribable feeling, not pain, not exactly regret, but something like standing in front of a closed door, not knowing whether to be relieved that it was closed or to be upset that you had been so close to it. She went into the bedroom after turning out the lights. Jonathan was reading. When she got into bed, he gently closed the book, looking at her for a long moment. She knew he wanted to ask, but he didn't. That made her breathless more than any conversation. "How was Boston?" he asked. "Finally. Beautiful," she said, crowded and a little full of memories. He nodded, saying nothing more, no probing, no pressing. But his silence weighed more heavily than an interrogation. She closed her eyes. In the darkness, Nathan's face appeared uninviting, not angry, not loving, not broken, just there, like an old, unfading ink stain on a folded page. 2 days later, Caroline was cleaning out the old bookcase in her study. When she pulled open the bottom drawer, an old silver box fell out. She recognized it immediately, a college keepsake box. Inside were a few photos, a notebook, and a piece of paper with a faint handwriting. There are places we go in our minds that no one else can reach. She picked up a photo, her and Nathan, sitting on the stone steps of the old school lawn, smiles on their faces, the wind blowing her hair. She looked into her own eyes in the photo, eyes that had believed the world could stop if only the other person stood beside them. She put the photo back, took out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote a letter, for the second time in a week. Not to send, just to write, "Nathan, maybe in everyone's life there is a net, not to catch anyone, but to keep what once belonged to them. I've lived well, and I still do. But on windless days like this, the net reappears, as if it had never left. I don't think we need to meet again, but I'm grateful because we loved each other once, and because now we can put it away properly." See, she folded the letter, placed it next to the old notebook, then stood up, walked out of the room, and closed the door gently. One night, Caroline had a dream. In her dream, she was walking through a winter forest. The trees were bare, the ground covered in grey snow. She saw a figure in the distance. It was Nathan. She stepped forward, but her foot caught on something. A net. It wasn't tied, but it wrapped around her leg as if each thread was woven from her own memories. She fell, but when she looked up, the man was gone. It was just her and the net. No one pulling, no one releasing. It was still dark when she woke up. The moonlight shone through the curtains, cold and white as metal. She turned to look at Jonathan. He was still sleeping, his face peaceful. She pressed her hand against his back, feeling the slow breathing of the man who had accompanied her for years, who had never made her choose, never held her back with words, but had always been there, who had not woven the net, but had untied the knots in her heart with his steady presence. The next morning, Caroline made breakfast as usual. Oliver was colouring. Jonathan was checking his email. She said abruptly, "I saw Nathan in Boston. He looked up, not surprised, not startled, just waiting for her to continue. We were just talking, at an old diner. Then I left. And are you okay now? He asked. She looked into his eyes, deep brown. No doubt. No anger, just an honest question. I'm not sure, she said honestly, but I'm learning to be okay. Jonathan said nothing. He just nodded. Then he put his hand on hers. His eyes said it all. I'm here, no matter how many nets pass through your life. Caroline took his hand, for the first time in many nights, without feeling any pangs. There was no turmoil in her heart. It was just a long, unfinished note, but it didn't have to stop. That night, Caroline burned the unsent letter to Nathan in the fireplace. The fire burned, orange-red light reflecting off the glass. She watched the words curl, twist, and turn to ash. Outside, snow began to fall, light and white, no more rain, no more wind, just silence, as if the universe knew that some things ended not with thunder, but with a silent nod from within. Late October. Vermont was in a distinct transition. Mornings were foggy, noons were sunny, and afternoons were filled with the sound of wind through the bare branches. Caroline had just finished her 5th period when she received a call from the kindergarten. Oliver had fallen in the playground, not seriously, but needed to be picked up. She rushed over, and when she saw her son sitting in the corner of the nurse's office, holding his slightly scraped knee, his eyes watery but not crying, she felt a sudden squeeze in her heart. I'm here, she said softly, holding him close. He leaned against her shoulder, silent. Caroline took him home, let him lie down, and made hot cocoa. When she stepped out onto the porch, she caught sight of Jonathan wiping down the pickup truck in the afternoon sun. The light slanted through the trees and fell onto the back of his shirt. She stopped and watched for a long moment, not for anything grand, but simply because she realized there are presences in life that don't need drama, just stability. Where are we going tomorrow? She asked. He turned. The whole family. Yeah. I want the 3 of us to go somewhere. Fields, lakes, anything. I want to go beyond the norm. Jonathan nodded, as if he had been waiting for that. The next day, they drove south, to a wide meadow near Lake Champlain. There was a trail leading into the woods, a few abandoned wooden benches, and the smell of damp grass. Oliver ran, his scrapes mostly healed. Caroline spread out a picnic blanket. Jonathan laid out bread and apples. No one said much, but the silence that day was not heavy. It was the kind of silence you can have only with people who don't need explanations. Caroline sat looking up at the soft grey sky and suddenly asked, "Have you ever doubted me?" Jonathan turned, his face like the last light of day, not harsh, but clear. "Sometimes," he said, "not for you, but for me. Because I know that sometimes you can miss someone, not because you want to come back, but because you never let go properly." She nodded. "I thought I let go, but actually I just kept going. What now?" She looked at her son picking leaves, at the vast field and the silence. "I don't want to let go of anything now. I want to hold on, what I have and what I've lost, but with an open hand." He squeezed her hand. "I'm here, and I know you are, too." As the sun set, they packed up, on the way home. Caroline suggested stopping by the town library. She wanted to return an overdue book, and borrow a few for the students. Jonathan stopped the car in front of the gate. She walked in, holding Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. Inside, the library was empty. The light from the ceiling created broken pools of light on the wooden floor. Caroline saw a little girl sitting in the corner reading children's books. She smiled, scanning the fiction section. Her hand stopped on a thin book, Letters Never Sent. She pulled it out, not because she intended to borrow it, but because the title touched something inside her. As she walked to the counter, she caught the eye of an older woman, a long-time librarian. "Miss Wells," the librarian said softly, "are you okay?" Caroline blinked. "Yes, I think so. You look like you've just gotten something off your chest." She smiled. Caroline didn't answer, but there were tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. That night, after Oliver had fallen asleep, Caroline opened the drawer where she had kept the letter to Nathan. The letter was gone. It was ash, and perhaps a part of her had been reborn with its disappearance. She took out a new notebook, cloth-bound, blue, and wrote on the first page, "There are things you need to keep, not to go back to, but to understand why you moved on. There are people who don't make it into the present, but who help you live more fully in the present. And there are nets that don't need to be cut. You just have to walk through them without being held back." She closed the notebook. She placed it next to the nightlight. A week later, Caroline stood in her classroom, reading to her students from Jane Eyre outside. The wind blew the last leaves into the schoolyard. When the bell rang, the students filed out. One girl turned and said, "Miss Wells, your voice is different today, like softer." Caroline smiled. "I think so, too." She stayed after class for a while, putting her books back on the shelf. On the table was a card from the organizers of the conference in Boston, thanking her for attending. She looked at it, then put it in her drawer, not to be kept as a treasure, but as part of the journey, kept, but no longer bound. The story ends with a late afternoon, the whole family sitting together in the garden, under the deep red sunset. Caroline raised her head, looked at the sky. No wind, no rain, no more heart-wrenching memories, only her son's laughter, and a man sitting next to her, her hand resting in his. The net still existed, but it no longer held her back, because this time, she was the one who walked through it herself.